Thank you, Andrew, and good evening, Brampton. I consider this a great delight. I've had the opportunity to work in about 40 communities in Ontario, and but this is my first time in your community. We don't have a lot of time to present, so I hope I can get into starting with a few questions, and let's see if we can do that. Can everyone here think back to the time when you were 10 years old? How far could you roam from home without an adult? Okay, so keep that thought in mind. And then I'd like to tell a story. Starting with the great-grandfather, George, at age 8, was allowed to walk 6 miles unaccompanied by an adult to go fishing. This is interesting, jumping up to the grandfather. Jack, at age 8 in 1960, was able to walk about 1 mile to his favorite woods. Go up to the mother, Vicky, at age 8, was permitted in 1979 to walk about half a mile to her swimming pool. But her son, Ed, now 8, is only allowed to walk about 100 meters, essentially toward the end of his block. So my presentation focuses on what is it we've done to take away childhood, to eliminate the possibility of being able to go places and do things. It's not one thing, it's many things. Notice the sign says to walk. It must be the U.S. because they don't have feet on pedestrians in the U.S. But even though the sign says to walk, and there are sidewalks and bike lanes, no one is walking or biking. It's a whole system change that we made. If you were to hit this traffic queue this time of day, any weekday, you're going to wait about 20 minutes to get through one intersection because we failed to build a system for all modes of travel. But there are many other things we lost. Donald Appleyard, a brilliant researcher, one of the first to embrace traffic calming, recognized that if you had low speed, low traffic volume, you had a lot of friends on the very block where you live and acquaintances. But if the traffic volumes and noise and speed picked up under heavy traffic, you're down to 0.09 friends and only about 3.1 acquaintances. This is research that goes back close to 40 years. We've lost other things. This is a chart or a map of happiness. Notice there is a blip of happiness, and interesting, it happened in the 60s. Now, I was a child of the 60s. I'm going to show you what it looked like. Fortunately, we've awakened. And today, the same park, Bryant Park in New York City, because we put a lot of love and thought and design into it, now looks like this. So there's hope, and maybe the hope starts with little oases in our towns to the point where we can now really create a really cool place to live. What I would like to get out of the session or share with you is indicated here. But I think the big point, I'm going to build on Gil Pinaliso's item, that we really, once we stopped designing cities for people and turned it over to cars, we really were starting to lose everything that mattered, including our health. We are the predicted next generation where our children won't live as long as we do. The average American is leaving about 12 to 14 years of life on the table. They just don't cash it in because of lifestyle. A lot of this started with modernism. This happens to be a scene in Detroit, a place where Ian has done a lot of the work to start to create better places for people to be. Oh, I went too fast. If we want to map obesity in our countries, then all we have to do is look at Houston, Texas. This is now the fattest city, certainly in North America. But if we went to the happiest country in North America. That would be Mexico. In many of their towns, they have not turned the cities over to the car. And what's interesting is the car is still there, but they've sent it underground through the old silver mine. So that's interesting how we can recycle various things. This is a very old chart now, but in the U.S., it's costing about $20,000 per capita, per person, to maintain health. I want to introduce a new concept, I believe. Has anyone here heard the term VUCA? It's a term the U.S. military developed. From here on out, the world is going to be more volatile, less certain, more complex, and ambiguous. And we're already seeing that. But one of the reasons we're going to places like that is that we're starting to spend large amounts of money on things that don't matter one iota. For example, if we measure what's referred to as levels of service, how well we respond to the need for cars to stay in motion, the last little bit that we're striving for is costing so much that we could actually take care of most of the rest of the chart if we just simply change what we value and not try to chase after the last of the congestion. The organization I now work for is called Blue Zones. And the leader of the Blue Zones movement, Dan Buettner, who you see standing on his head here, wrote the third most read article ever to appear in National Geographic history, The Secrets to Living Longer, Healthier, and Happier Lives. He's now got 4 covers for National Geographic, the only person in the world that went past 1. What Dan did with National Geographic support is went out and sent a full team in to figure out why people do live longer, healthier, happier lives in certain locations. These are the regions where that has happened. And then he reverse engineered in U.S. cities first, and we're announcing in a few weeks the first Canadian city that will be a Blue Zones community. This is essentially what it comes down to. All humans are subject to genetics, but that's only 20% of how long we live. The other 80% is within our control. Our lifestyles, what we eat, how many friends we have, many things. I'm not going to get into the traits of the longest lived people. I think you can see them in a reflection here. But very important that we build our cities so that this comes naturally. The first Blue Zone community was in a very cold city, Albert Lea, Minnesota. And when we got there, with 3 years of funding, they asked if we could bring the longevity that they sought. And we found out they had money to rebuild Main Street, and they said, yes, we're going to widen it. And when I found that out, I said, I don't think so. And so we reversed that decision, made it in a purposeful direction. And so that street, I have a little problem with the changer. Does it need batteries, do you think? Or do I need to just stand somewhere else? So as you can see here, we took 3 lanes out of the road, and by doing that, it's easier for businesses to become established, for people to walk and bike to destinations, and so on. The crashes came down 78%. And the outcome of the Blue Zone effort in this community is that we were able to cut healthcare costs 50%. Think about that. That's huge. Can a technician help me? Where should I point this to get it changed? Oh, 49%. We now are in 51 cities, and again, we're very pleased. In a few weeks, we'll announce which Canadian city will be chosen. It's already picked. And this is another one of the towns I'm very, very pleased with, Muscatine, where they made most of the world's buttons for a while. And notice how much traffic is on the street. And one of the approaches we're taking in Muscatine, which I think you'll see here in a minute as soon as this changes, is that we are able to knock it again down to 2 lanes and really add in more trails, more green, more place. Here's the interesting thing. Muscatine's a small town, 20,000. And they raised over $426 million once they started acting together. In fact, I recently had a conversation with the city manager. He says, Dan, it's much closer now to $1 billion for a town of 20,000. And that's by designing a city for people and getting the right orientation. So there are a number of things that when we go into a town that we do, and I know Ian does virtually all of these as well, is we focus on changing the whole physical, mental, social, environmental, and economic picture. And Joe's going to talk in depth about that. But we look at structural readiness. And this series of conferences is exactly what we look for, in that people are becoming informed and ready to work with their town, work with all of their folks to start to bring the change. We look at completing the streets, making the streets for all people, making sure the land use matches what the community's need is with the growth we're having. And again, all of these items you see on the picture. Now in blue zones, we use a concept known as the life radius. And essentially that's where you live, can you find all the things you need for worship, food, visiting friends, going to school. And the more compact the radius, the healthier you become. And that's essentially the set of principles that you're setting out to achieve. I can show it very quickly with just a few diagrams. If you only have this structure for your streets, you're not going to be able to walk. And if you did, it's going to be very tough. But if you have good street connectivity, good block form, then there's a much greater chance you're going to enjoy walking. But you still are missing the most vital ingredient, and that is you have to have destinations. So once you put them all together, it starts to really work. This comes from Jane Jacobs herself, and notice this is an unwalkable place. What would you put in to make it walkable?
Sidewalk.
Yep. And something still missing, what else would you put in? Green it up, right? But the most important thing is still missing, and that is you have to have eyes on the public realm. So once we start to understand this and build that into our bylaws and so on, we can really start to get people out walking. It's not just about sidewalks. It's how we design our communities. Very interesting, if you look at the neighborhood on the left, it's got great street connectivity. And I'll just use Fire Station as one example. These are US dollars in US City. It costs $159 a year to maintain your fire protection. But if you use a sprawl pattern, disconnected streets, it costs, for the same service for a household, $740. It's a huge difference. So street connectivity doesn't just keep the speeds low, and give it possible for walking. So I'm going to quickly show the elements of a good land use plan. If you have a next set of land to develop, you need to lay out the circulation so that one, you're going to end up with distributed traffic and good, easy ways to get to the places you really want to get to. This is another Blue Zones town. This is Salinas, California. Then you insert neighborhoods, the centers, the schools. These better inform some of the last and most important changes. So all of this needs to occur if people are going to walk. You have to have the right structure. Wonderful little treatment to show how a town grows. If you have this as your original, in time, development occurs further out. That's going to generate more traffic. And the road gets widened, that attracts other development, and more you see strips and the style of development evolve. And now you've built about as many roads as you can. You've reached the level where that nothing else can be improved. And Ian's going to explain what improved means. But now you have the opportunity to come back and build it correctly. Something you should have done is to put in 2 parallel streets, and now you can have real villages form, make it easy for people to use transit, to walk, to bike, and so that's all part of it. One item that I think is very important is to put everything of importance where it belongs. I was working in a small town one day and found out that they had already put their people with disabilities way out on the fringe. Their multifamily is way out from the center, and for seniors, way out. So I found out where they were thinking of putting their town center. They hadn't built it yet, their new city hall, and sure enough, I guessed it correctly. So if you do all these things, you're going to have bigger roads. And so getting things in the right place is a very fundamental element. But if you're going to build new, shopping, you have to get it in as close as you can. But everyone has to work together in order to pull that one off. And so very important that each of you are here gaining additional knowledge on all the items it takes to build a city. I am a total proponent of high street connectivity. This is one of my favorite books to read, and the author, Stefan, I think, from London. And when I read the book, I immediately went out and bought a set of airline tickets for my wife and myself to London, because I wanted to see this particular section was going to have a freeway. Fortunately, it got stopped. But I want to show you what came out of that neighborhood over the course of history. It's called Tottenham Court. Fitzrovia is another part of it. But all of these ideas were given birth because of the high street connectivity, the number of universities, hospitals, bars, where people would naturally bump into one another, what I call high bump intuitiveness. And but think about what it would be like if the great minds hadn't gathered together in one place, lived there, and developed their careers there. So all three of us as presenters tonight are going to talk about the ability to go out in your town and take a picture like this. It would happen naturally as you focus on and pay attention to all of these elements together. This happens to be Madison, Wisconsin. It's a pretty cold place, but it really, really works. The difference between a walkable community versus one that's car-centric is even in Orlando, where many of the tourists come, the original streets were built like the one on the top. Today they're building them a little better, but not as well as they are in Hartford, which you see in the bottom scene. Notice the woman standing in the street in Missoula, Montana. The street on the right, which is in Canada, moves more traffic. It has fewer crashes. The retail life of the street is just off the charts. So think about how a street informs how people can live, where they can shop, where they have to go. In a town, Gulf Shores, Alabama, I found out this 2-lane road, well, essentially a 3-lane road, was to be widened for hurricane relief. And this is what they were going to build. When I did this little photomorph, the city engineer was sitting in the seat in the front row, almost next to me, and I saw her cry. And I'd never seen a traffic engineer cry. So I asked why she's crying. She said, "Dan, that deal is done." I said, "No, it's not. Until you actually pour the concrete, you can still make changes." The street will be built as you see here. We're going to pick up some additional opportunity through a nature preserve where we're going to build a bike trail. But during hurricane relief, we can evacuate people and get supplies back into the community. So everything we build from here on out needs to be built for multiple uses, multiple purposes. Target speed, something else I want to get into. The street you see on top became the street on the bottom. It's a main street in a town called Lancaster. It's in California. And I think the important thing is, and sorry, everything is presented in miles per hour, but I understand Canadians speak two languages. But if you were to be hit at 20, you've got very good chances of survival. But just increase that 10, and it's now a toss of a coin. But if you were to be hit at 40, your life is over. Only a very few will survive that. So, toss out in either kilometers or miles per hour what you think most motors would drive here. Fast, right? What if you did this? What if you did that? What if you did that? Here comes a big one. What if you did that? And then that invites the developers in. Now you've got a street that I would say will probably operate at 15 to 20 miles per hour. You'll maximize exchange, retail, social life of the street by doing that. Ian, how much more time do I have? Oh, good. Okay. A U.S. president laid out this town. Which U.S. president? A lot of people say Jefferson. Washington. On top of that hill is Mount Vernon. As I understand it, Washington never went to college. And yet, back then, people used common sense. They didn't have a lot of rules to follow. They just copied those things that were already successful. Not too far from there is Tyson's Corner. Tyson's Corner looks like this, or did in the early years. Today, Tyson's Corner looks like this. This is what you do not want to become. It's got all the parts, but the parts aren't integrated. And in fact, AAA, American Automobile Association, left this town because it was taking too long for the workers to get to work. You don't have to go too far to get to another city, Washington, D.C., which looks like this. They have the same parts, but the parts work together. There's a certain harmony in how this is all laid out. So we call Washington, D.C. a real, true, walkable city. So we take an area of land, and we could have it, as you see on the left, but that same area could be laid out like you see on the right, which is very walkable. It makes, and Joe will get into this, a lot more money. Think about how much more money it makes, but Joe's going to give you the facts and the figures on that. But I think it's very important to point out that when we see either or the other at grade, we begin to realize why we do or do not want to be there, right? And it truly starts with pattern. All the things that really matter. Ian will get into many of the details of how to make it work. But again, what we've been building is only for the car, and it's not for livability, it's not for health. But if we make the changes, then we really truly, I'm going to need a little water. Excuse me, I got a peanut or something like that. Thank you, Ian. Don't want to die on the stage. Okay. I think I'm set now. Yeah, thank you. One of the great early urban thinkers of all time, Clarence Perry, laid out a very simple concept for what a small town should be. And it was many years later that some of the modern recent thinkers in urban design actually laid it out. And they're so similar in concept. Seaside is one of the first of what we think of as a new way to build towns for people. The land became very valuable in a very short period of time. But a Canadian city I like to celebrate in Burnaby is this little village. It's called Highgate Village. It was nothing more than a strip. And they built buildings to the street for the first time. And then you can see where the strip part had been behind the new buildings. So you can see them being built and the finished street. You can see the towers, the density, the mix of uses went way up. But today, it's one of the best places you can live. You can have a very fast transit trip down into to Vancouver and so on. I want to say, with my travels and experience and work in Canada, Canada is far ahead of the U.S. We have some hot spots, but you really have models in so many places. Another town where I'm going to be actually in a week to work on is Marina. And you can see there's only one remaining place that they could put in a real town center. What the transit agency thought is, well, we own the land, we're going to build the way we want to meet our needs. So this is what was proposed. We found out what they were doing, that this is the last place they could actually put a town center. So we came to them with an alternative for a town center, so that it would work even better for transit, and now they could have a true mixed-use village, a place for people to gather, a place for farmers markets, and so on. And I think the point I'm trying to make here is as succinct as I can. We can no longer think of one use of a land or one function of an agency. If we're not acting together, then we're destroying our town and not making it a healthy, vital place for people to live. 5 minutes left. Is that right? Okay. Another town I'm very proud of is called University Place. It has no university. And as you can see here, it has no place. When I started working here, they only had 1 mile of sidewalk, no bike trails. And we decided to rebuild the road. And so now you can see where they're going to build their actual retail mixed use, as you see here. This is the key road. Back when it was designed this way, it had a very high fatal count, and we transformed that street. This is not a photomorph, this is actual. Today they have Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, large apartments. They have 7 other strips that they're now converting into true villages. And you can see, again, the first years, and just 9 years later, this is what the same street looks like. I'm also a very strong proponent of roundabouts. This street was 5 lanes. We were able to work with the community. We took out all the lanes except for 2. We brought the speeds from 40, 50 miles an hour down to about 19 miles per hour. The retail life of the street took off like a rocket. And I'm going to close with this story. These children who I saw in Barcelona. Did I do something wrong here? Anyway, you remember the image. Those children in Barcelona, when I photographed, I came back to my mentor, Ramon Trias, said, Ramon, what am I seeing here? I need to know the story. And he said, Dan, you just found the secret of Barcelona. Those children are being led around 1 week by architects, another by planners, another by elected leaders, to be shown how cities work. And there's an awareness that the best minds will nurture into those professions, and the rest will become voters. So I want to leave everyone here with a lot of hope, and the more people we can get that speak the language and understand that, yes, cities are fairly complex, but the answers are very simple. But we have to know what those answers are, because a lot of people don't come to meetings like this and don't become well-informed, and then they lead us into the wrong direction. And with that, I'm going to relinquish my last remaining minute.